Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Faithless Forrest.
And I'm Larry Rhodes, and we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and for people committed to a life rooted in science and free of supernatural beliefs. Today's show topic, Darwin Day Worldwide, and an answer to a caller's question from last week. But first we want to tell you a little bit about our sponsors. The Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has a fun meetup at a bar or eatery in Knoxville. Tonight's meetup is at Barley's Taproom and Pizzeria in the Old City starting around 5:30. Look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table. And as Matt Dillahunty of the Atheist Experience always says, everyone is welcome to our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't.
The Rationalists of East Tennessee have several regular monthly meetings. The first and third Sunday mornings of the month are usually lectures with lively roundtable discussions. The second Sunday we hold a book club discussion, and the fourth Sunday there's usually a get-together we call Reflections. It features a potluck lunch at someone's home.
Later in the show, we'll give you our websites to visit for additional details, including times and locations.
Well, today is February 11th, 2013, and following a long tradition, the President of the United States issued a proclamation, I guess it was earlier this week, marking an important anniversary. This year's begins. In 1786, the Virginia General Assembly affirmed an ideal that has long been central to the American journey. The Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, penned by Thomas Jefferson, and goes on to say, "Today America embraces people of all faiths and no faiths. We are Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Hindus, Buddhists and Sikhs, atheists and agnostics." About this proclamation, the Secular Coalition for America wrote, "The Presidential Proclamation on Religion Freedom Day, issued last week, recognizes people of no faith and specifically includes atheists and agnostics for the first time in over 200 years of presidential proclamations." Well done, Mr. President.
January 16th every year is the anniversary of the adoption of the state of Virginia legislation, of which Thomas Jefferson was more proud than of being President of the United States. Described variously as the Virginia Act establishing religious freedom, the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom on Jefferson's tombstone is recorded as the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedoms. He didn't put that he was the President of the United States, or he didn't have it put on his tombstone, but he did want this on his tombstone.
Yep.
Over 700 words long. We will not read it all, but urge viewers to look it up on wikipedia.org. They have full text at the page called Virginia Statute of Religious Freedoms. Let's just hear the last paragraph. "Be it enacted by the General Assembly that no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever, nor shall he be enforced, restrained, molested, or burdened in his body or goods, nor shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief, but that all men shall be free to profess, and by any argument to maintain their opinions in matters of religion, and that the same shall in no wise diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil liberties." And though we well know that this assembly, elected by the people for the ordinary purposes of legislation only, have no power to restrain the acts of succeeding assemblies constituted with powers equal to our own, and that therefore to declare that this act is irrevocable would be of no effect in the law, yet we are free to declare that the rights hereby asserted are of natural rights of mankind, and that if any act shall be hereafter passed to repeal the present or to narrow its operation, such act will be an infringement of natural rights.
Well done, Mr. Jefferson. All right. Well, unfortunately, Florida's Levy County falls short of Jefferson's ideals. The county courthouse lawn is hosting a Ten Commandments monument, but the county has rejected a monument containing quotes from the same Thomas Jefferson and others. The monument, similar to the one placed in Florida County, whose name I didn't write, I guess, was offered by members of the Williston atheist group. We wish them luck in getting their monument equal treatment to the Christian monument in the public forum the county of Levy created.
And,
You suppose that's Levy or Levy?
I think it's Levi,
All right.
but I don't know.
It sounds biblical.
It does. The president of the American Atheists, can't remember his name offhand, recently said that the statute is going to go up. He said it may cost the taxpayers of Levi County hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost court cases, but it's going to go up. They're going to have it one way or the other. They should just go ahead and allow it and save a lot of money. Finally, mark your calendars for May 1st, the National Day of Reason. Taking place on the first Thursday in May, the same day as the National Day of Prayer, by the way, there is a regional convention of secularists about 200 miles to our east in Hickory, North Carolina. On May 1st, the National Day of Reason rally on the square in downtown Hickory, North Carolina. Starts at 5 p.m. to celebrate reason over religious influence in secular affairs. Speakers include Cash and Love from the popular Atheists on Air podcast, Gene Elliott, the founder and president of the Hickory Humanist Alliance and Skepticism Advocacy Group of North Carolina, as well as Sean Murphy, president of the Charlotte Atheists and Agnostics.
On May 3rd, the Reason Con, and it's punctuated weird, a one-day secular convention. Speakers for Reason Con 1 include Richard Carrier, I guess, a world-renowned author and speaker. As a professional historian, published philosopher, and prominent defender of the American Freethought movement, Dr. Carrier has appeared across the U.S., in Canada and the U.K., and on American television and London radio, defending sound historical methods and ethical worldviews of secular naturalism. Another speaker for Reason One Con, and he is he's the author of Proving History, Bayes' Theorem, and the Quest for the Historical Jesus, Sense and Goodness Without God, Not the Impossible Faith, Why I'm Not a Christian, and Hitler, Homer, Bible Christ? Yeah, okay. It's an awkward title there. Yeah. And a major contributor to The Empty Tomb, The Christian Delusion, and the End of Christianity.
So that's Richard Carrier.
Richard Carrier. I think both were Richard Carrier? Mm-hmm. Yep, all right. And finally, Tracy Harris, one of the newer faces on The Atheist Experience and a regular contributor to the Godless Bitches podcast. You can learn more at the hickoryhumanist.org website. And I guess, Larry, shall we get on to the topic for which we came to the studio today?
Sure. Let me take a minute to advise the viewers that this is a call-in show. The phone lines are open. The number's at the bottom of the screen. We'd be more than happy to take your comments and or questions.
All right, well, I guess we're going to talk about the history of Darwin Day and its purpose. Darwin Day is a global celebration of science. I guess this is from the darwinday.org website. A celebration of science and reason held on or around February 12th, the birth anniversary of evolutionary biologist Charles Darwin. And the University of Tennessee is participating.
And also the birthday of
Abraham Lincoln.
They were both born on exactly the same day. Viewers there will, at the University of Tennessee, will still see some events scheduled tonight and tomorrow. Let's see here. 7 o'clock keynote speaker by, 7 p.m. keynote lecture by Andrew Barry, Darwin Wallace Day, UC Auditorium. February 12th at tonight at 9 a.m. Well, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. today. I guess it's already gone now.
It's tomorrow. Today's the 11th.
Okay.
That's on the 12th.
Darwin Day, Tennessee Information Booth, Pedestrian Walkway, or the University Center booth, if it's in the rain. And
or snow.
Tomorrow at 11, video, Charles Darwin and the Tree of Life. That's in the Hodges Library, room 213. 12 p.m., noon, a video, Gattaca at the Hodges Library, also in room 213. And from 12:30 to 1:30 is a lunch talk by Nick Motzke, The Intelligent Design Debate, Bueller Room, number 511.
Yeah. Unfortunately, English doesn't come with a good pronunciation guide at times. All right. So one of those videos mentions the tree of life. Behind us is how Darwin illustrated that idea that species diverge into other species. And he wrote in the last chapter, the last paragraph of his book, The Origin of Species. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed laws of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved.
That sketch explains the principle, but the tree of science has revealed to us has become increasingly complex as we learn more and the tools of investigation improve. So we can bring up the next slide and show just how complicated it's looking now.
Well, let's see, the next, so this is a step into, I think, the late 1800s. And this tree of life was drawn by, I think his name is pronounced Ernst Haeckel or Haeckel. And what we see in it is that there's a kind of a root, and then there's three major branches going up. Well, if we moved then to that next slide, called the modern tree of life, there we go. Well, that tree has had so much detail added to it that it's impossible. Well, it's impossible to represent without like a huge wall and still very fine drawing. So.
What is that, a circle up there?
Well, the circle in the center, I guess, would represent possibly the most common ancestor to all life. And so what kind of characteristics might the most common ancestor have had? Well, perhaps DNA, perhaps RNA, and the current genetic code. But it's not certain that would have been the first life. It's merely that that's the life that has left descendants. There may have been life before that would be somewhat different, and perhaps we might even have difficulty recognizing it as life.
It might be recombinant DNA or RNA that doesn't even have a cell wall. It's just a string of chemicals that replicates itself.
Potentially free-floating in an ocean environment that's different from what we have today.
Did we have a phone call? Was that?
I think the door just drifted open.
Oh, okay. Okay, regardless from this beginning date, beginning today, we have the fungi, plants, protists, and animals?
And animals. Mm-hmm. And I guess somewhere here in that center, well, the previous tree of life, if we back up to Haeckel's tree for just a moment, the protists would be the root here. So that would be one of those four. And then we've got these other branches, and they're multicellular. So then if we advance again to the modern tree, what we see is there's so much detail that it's hard to see. But I think right here near Larry's shoulder, there's sort of an array that branches out. And I think that's related to really kind of a new kingdom that was only rather recently recognized, that wouldn't have been in Haeckel's drawing. And they're all single-cell creatures, but they're sufficiently different, and I think the biochemistry of how they live, that they've been awarded their own kingdom. So now there are
cells with nuclear membranes?
Well, no, I don't believe so. I think they don't have the nuclear membrane, and they would have thought to have been bacteria and stuff. Larry, we have our first caller. You want to greet them?
Sure. This is Freethought Forum. You're on the air. May we have a name or a nickname, please?
Nick.
Hello. Could you speak up? I think I may have heard Nick.
That's correct.
All right, Nick. Great. Thank you for calling. A comment or a question for us?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what the tree of life is there that you're trying to talk about.
Well, we're going to cover that, and the answer is sort of the whole program today. If we back up one slide to the Haeckel drawing, the root of this is called single-celled creatures, or protozoa. Did you have a high school biology class where you would have learned about protozoa, Nick?
Yes, but that would have been years ago.
Okay. Now, then coming off of this in this drawing from the 1800s, we would have had, and I'm not sure which branch is which, but we would have had plants, we would have had fungi, and we would have had animals.
Okay.
And, plants are quite different from us, and fungi are different in a way that it's a lot harder to explain, and I don't understand it well myself. And we all can look at plants and animals and certainly see that they're pretty different. But within these groups, we then see differences as well. So for instance, we can look at cats and lions and tigers, and we see a similarity, but we know that they're different than foxes and wolves and dogs. Do you understand that kind of difference?
Yes.
Okay, so
We can go to that.
so what that is kind of like is that these various branches represent a kind of a commonality, but by the time you get to the twigs, that's where a cat is different than a leopard. And thus it's called a tree.
It's actually more like a bush. It's not two-dimensional. It just goes in every different directions.
Okay.
But they have three branches, main branches coming off the bottom.
So Nick, your question was the tree of life, right? Did I at least approach an answer to that?
I think so, a little bit.
So that's the modern understanding, and by modern understanding, this was happening before Darwin. People were looking at the, in a sense, trying to draw a map of the relationship of living creatures, and it naturally looks kind of like a tree, and the question arose, does this tree grow? And even before Darwin, there were ideas about how it grew, but what Darwin's great accomplishment was explaining how why it grows, and we'll try and touch on that a little bit more.
Now, do you guys believe in God or anything like that?
I don't.
I don't.
Is this like a form of religion with the tree?
Well, it depends if you define it as a worldview as a religion, or if religion requires there's a supernatural being to whom you pray and who answers prayers. Do you think that a religion it requires something to whom you pray and it answers prayers?
Yes, but I think that you have to have a belief system. If not, you're going to go to hell.
Okay, and you understand that as atheists, we wouldn't believe there is a hell.
There's lots of things you've got to prove before you can even get to hell. You've got to prove that there's, well, not only God, but that we have souls.
All right. Well, okay, Nick, but thanks for asking the question, because when we have callers and talking about evolution, it does seem to me that we need to cover very, very basic points about what the assertions of evolution are, and I hope that we do so today. Man, we've covered 20 minutes, and maybe we should try and pick up the script and pick up the pace.
Okay.
I think we left off here about cells.
Cells with nuclear membrane are known from about at least 1.2 billion years of age, to 1.2 billion years of the age of the Earth.
No, a billion years ago, yeah.
Okay, I'll go. So we and the plants and fungi have a common ancestor, perhaps about that time. Could be before. Animals with hard parts start to show up in the late Precambrian, the Ediacaria. From Wikipedia, the Ediacarian biota consists of enigmatic tubular and frond-shaped, mostly sensile organs, which lived during the Ediacarian period, which was 635 to 542 million years ago.
And please note, that's before the Cambrian.
Right.
That's important.
Right, and one thing that I like to put out when we're talking about years and the life of the Earth is almost 4 billion years old. No, so the first life didn't show up on Earth until less than 1 billion years ago.
No.
Well,
the first multicellular life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before that, it was either single cell or no life.
Yeah. Well, the earliest evidence of life is from around 3.5 billion years ago. And I think I've even seen occasionally numbers of 3.9 billion.
So almost as soon as the Earth was formed, there was Primitive life?
Within 500 million years, half a billion years, there's, I think, evidence of life.
There was also, you need to throw out that, what was it, a quarter of a billion years after the Earth was formed, that it was hit by another Earth-like or Mars-like body, which...
Well, I think the forming of the Earth would reflect the most recent cooling of the crust, which is something on the order of 4.5 billion years ago.
Creation, how the moon came to be,
yeah.
what I was talking about.
And that's about 4.5 billion years ago.
Even if there was some early life starting at that time, it would have all been wiped out and had to have started it over.
Yeah, that impact would have been a complete extinction event for any surface life.
Okay.
Even deep life.
The Ediacaran period here that we're talking about was 635 to 542 million years ago. Trace fossils of these organisms have been found worldwide and represent the earliest known complex multicellular organisms. The Ediacaria biota radiated in an event called the Avalon explosion 575 million years ago, after the Earth thawed from the cryogenic period's extensive glaciation. The biota largely disappeared contemporaneously with the rapid appearance of biodiversity known as the Cambrian explosion. Most of the currently existing body plans of animals first appeared only in the fossil record of the Cambrian rather than the Ediacaria.
Ediacarian, I think, yeah.
For macroorganisms, the Cambrian biota completely replaced the organisms that populated the Ediacaran fossil record.
All right. So if we look at that first big circle, there are a lot of animals there, and we had a little red circle. And now what I've done is we've zoomed in on just the animal segment, once again, a circle. And if we step yet closer, finally, way, way in tight, in the center of that circle, it says Homo sapiens. And all around, we're surrounded by our cousins. These are animals that have a common ancestor, just like my cousins have a common grandparent. As we step farther back, we see more and more distant cousins. So how are these trees drawn? And I don't mean by crayon or pencil, but by what evidence?
Well, many lines of evidence go into it. Some of the oldest is to look for morphology of the organism. Common features imply common ancestries. It then becomes a matter of determining the degree to find the degree of relationship. These kinds of relationships can become increasingly difficult to tease out as you get better and better detail because, of course, there is a continuum to evolution.
All right, so let's move to that next slide where we look at limbs. All right, so what this is all about is that in the hand of man, which I guess is on my shoulder here, is this the paw of a cat? Yep. The fin of a whale and the wing of a bat. These are all mammals, and they have limbs that look so very different on the outside, and they work so different. Our hands can pick up and grasp things. Cats' limbs are great at chasing and grabbing small things. The whale's fin is utterly different. It's meant to propel them through a fluid. And finally, the wing of a bat is propelling the bat through a different kind of fluid. But yet, they all actually have the same parts. Mm-hmm. There's little bitty digits out on the end. There's a blob of bones, or a big group of bones that correspond to our wrist. There are two bones that allow this sort of turning motion. And then finally, up attaching to the body, there's one bone.
And just the kind of thing you would expect if you were seeing a mechanism such as evolution by natural selection, in that it's using the same design, but adapting to different usages and environments.
The basic plan is the same, and that you have merely tinkered with the ratio of the parts. In other words, to get these extremely different kinds of limbs, you're actually only dealing with changes of the ratios of the parts.
Right.
There isn't nearly as much innovation. You don't have to invent a whole lot to get a fin or a wing or a claw or a dexterous hand.
And if it was the creation of an all-powerful deity, he could make them any way he wanted to and not have to use the same old design over and over again.
and perhaps wouldn't have to use some of the clumsy things that make our wrists prone to carpal tunnel syndrome, for instance. Well, this might be a good time to get a dictionary definition of evolution and the etymology of the word, which is a poetry I like and is helpful as a metaphor. Evolution, any process of formation or growth, development, for instance, the evolution of a drama, or a pattern formed by a series of movements, the evolution of a figure skater, fader-skigger. And the history of the world is like this from the 1620s on. And we get this definition, an opening of what was rolled up, from the Latin evolutionem, or evoluto is, I guess, the nominative, whatever nominative would be. It is an unrolling. It is of a book. And to our modern senses, when someone says unrolling, I think of a scroll. We use the word scroll. So there's a kind of a poetry to that evolution represents this sort of unrolling, where it's a very long thing that just keeps going and going, and you roll some part of it up and you unroll the next. That rolling up is like the extinction of so many of our ancestors, and what we roll out is the new stuff developing today.
It should take the second to say that 95% of all living things that ever appeared on Earth have gone extinct, which is not much of a plan if you're a creator and trying to make your creations viable.
It makes you sort of ask, well, what were they there for if they weren't important enough to keep around? All righty. So, I think we probably want to jump ahead just a little bit more. And
we'll break while we're at the bottom of the hour.
Yeah, we're getting pretty close to that.
Okay.
Let's jump to that mid-program break and talk about the organizations that make our show possible.
If you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions. Shows are live most every Tuesday from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern on Community Access Television, Comcast Channel 6. No, it's Channel 12. And there's another one on Channel 6. I can't remember what it is. The
Charter, probably.
Charter, depending on your cable network. Tell your out-of-town friends that they can see us streaming online at 5 o'clock every Tuesday at ctvknox.org.
This is a call-in show, and we are live today, February 11th. The viewers can call in now to the number on the screen with a short comment or question. Call in now while we go to an informative break. Play that video, Sam.
It's laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets weekly for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org. If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun.
And we're back.
All right, well, great.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville.
Oh, it's good you're paying attention.
We have evening meetups for food, drink, and conversation. Ask's purpose is to supply a venue for camaraderie, community, and outreach to atheists, agnostics, and freethinkers, and other like-minded persons in the East Tennessee area. Our Tuesday meeting is going on now at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria in the Old City.
The Rationalist of East Tennessee has Sunday activities involving lively presentations and discussions on subjects both topical and timeless. Once a month we get together for a book club. You need not have read the book to attend, but of course it helps. March's book is The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion by Jonathan Hedit. I'm not sure. Sorry, Jonathan. All right. If you're watching, Jonathan, I mangled it. My bad. Visit rationalists.org to find the rest of the calendar for books. Join us at Barnes & Noble Booksellers, 8029 Kingston Pike, 4 p.m. every second Sunday of the month.
Both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee help provide a social outlet where that you'll find that if you don't believe in God, you'll also find that you're not alone.
You're not alone. All right, great. So let's jump back to where we were discussing things. And last week we had a caller who asked a question on which I would like with you to elaborate a further answer. The caller, JT, asked, take a microscopic life form, and over time it evolves and eventually becomes a mammal and a human. Let me ask you this. If your heart stops beating, what happens? And I guess the answer you gave was...
You die.
You die,
Yeah.
okay. Then he said, in the theory of evolution, how far back do you go? What was this life form like? What was it doing while it was waiting for its heart to evolve? And I can't help but think, well, what did he think he meant, waiting for its heart to evolve?
This is a line of reasoning that Christian apologetics and other apologetics are putting out. Says, well, what did we do while we're waiting for eyes to evolve? Were we just blind?
And I must admit, I thought, did he think we're sitting there like with an empty chest where our heart should be, saying, well, a heart may pop into existence today?
Well, that's a straw man argument. It's a logical fallacy. They create a situation that is indefensible and then say that position is used on our side to defend our position. It's not.
So here we go. We're going to try and answer that question, though.
Okay. Viewers, our idea here is to work with many ways the question can be interpreted. We remind viewers that we all begin as a single cell fused from the two living gametes of our parents. So in a way, life began back with all life. So in a way, our life began just like all life billions of years ago. A particular arrangement of genetic information, which is each of us, begins with that fusion. And so that is something like the beginning of each of us as individuals.
All right. So that single cell is an echo of what all life was like when it was no more complex than one single cell. Single cell forms still exist today, called protista. That was the root of that tree of life. Okay. All right. Should we grab this call?
Sure.
All right. Hello, caller. Please give us a name or a nickname so that we know how to address you.
Okay.
Okay, and please speak up.
I'm sorry.
And please.
Can we have your name again, please?
Yeah. Hello, give us a name, please.
You're on the air.
Buford.
Hello, Buford. Sorry we didn't get that at first. Can you have a question or a comment for us today about our show?
Well, I just was sitting here flipping across the channels and came upon your show, and I thought I would call in and see what's going on, in a sense.
We're here representing the atheist community of Knoxville, freethinkers, agnostics, that type of thing. We're talking about evolution. Did you have a comment or question about our show topic?
Okay. Well, I certainly hear a lot about this and all, and I wonder about lots of things, and evolution. Well, I would have to say, let's see, how can I word this? What's the idea of how, shall we say, a lion becomes a tiger, or who decides whether the tiger is the next form up, or whatever. No, who came up with the idea? Or
Well, first of all, you're presupposing a who. I mean, right there, you're saying that it has to be an intelligence doing it, and we don't concede that. Secondly, lions never turn into tigers, but I think that what you're saying is how does a new species become evolved from an old species? Is that your question?
Yeah, how, who,
Again, you're saying who.
I'm sorry?
Again, you're using the word who when you're saying that evolution is going to create or is going to produce a new species. It's not a who, it's a what? It's a process. Natural process, which is what Darwin brought to light in his time.
Well, let's see, how can
I'd like to speak next.
word this? And for whatever reason, you're not coming through very clearly. I don't know whether that's me or what, but anyway.
Sometimes the phone connections are not good. Did you not hear? Does Larry need to go over that again?
Anyway, let's say, and I think this person, I think he was at the University of Virginia, MD or PhD person, who got all the DNA for the human person, I think. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, let's say you take a horse or an animal of some sort and could define all the DNA of that animal, and you wanted to change it to another animal. Is there a mechanism, or did something happen that all the DNA switched so that the next offspring from that animal became a elephant or whatever?
Okay, well, let me answer that for you, Buford. And the answer is that evolution doesn't claim that horses turn into elephants or things like that, and that there was a switch all at once. What we know is that DNA, there can be small changes from generation to generation.
Mutations.
And those are called mutations. And those mutations are not directed. They go in random directions. So if they affect a gene that determines how fast a leg grows, you might get creatures that, but how fast it grows relative to everything else will determine how long it is to the rest of the body. So you could have offspring that are going to be both taller and shorter, but if it's advantageous to be taller to get to taller leaves, you end up with giraffes. But of course, being smaller may help some of the other creatures, and so you could have pygmy animals, and what had common parents may turn into two separate populations. Now then there's a kind of thing that's a little bit hard to imagine how it happens, because it doesn't happen very often, so we don't see it happening every day. And that is that when do two populations cease to be able to breed with each other? So a lot of times we talk about species as being the test for whether or not creatures are the same species is whether or not they can have viable offspring.
Yeah.
Now, that's not a clear-cut thing, because sometimes people who breed dogs are going to know that, well, my goodness, when you get extreme sizes differences, well, you can't breed them, at least not directly anymore. So in a sense, the great big dogs that have the barrel, the cliche where they take brandy to the people stuck in the snow. What kind of dog is that, man? Well, anyway, the great big huge dog, and then you got the little bitty, the Saint Bernard, and then you got the little bitty teacup Chihuahua. They aren't going to have children together readily. Now, maybe they can through intermediates, but it begs the question, are they separate species when they're so very different?
Yeah. Well, let's say using the Adam and Eve situation, I am a retired physician, but anyway, I can remember first time being in on a, quote, delivery. And I would have to say that's a good thing there was a resident in there with me, because even though I kind of knew what was going to happen, I'm not sure that I would have gotten away with a live delivery. Hopefully I would have. But Adam or whoever was the first person.
Well, we don't believe that that's the case.
How would he know what was going on when his wife, if he figured out how to produce anyway, how would he know what to do?
Well, Buford, you understand that we don't believe in the truth of the Bible. We think it's just stories people wrote. So we don't think that situation really happened. And in reality, if you think it happened, isn't it your God who put Adam in that awkward position anyway? But let me get to a point that since you've been involved in human birth, you must understand something about, how that all happens. And we all begin as one cell, and that's how it's thought that all life, that the life was like that. Billions of years ago, and that it is a process of accumulated changes that gets us to where we are now. And you and I have, in a sense, gone through that same process. We began as one cell.
Yeah, but for the first person, whether that was Adam or whoever it was.
But there was no first person.
How did they know? Whatever. Are you familiar with Masters and Johnson?
Well, no. Let me answer you this. In the animal kingdom, in the primate kingdom, where there's all kinds of deliveries going on every day, the male, the male of the species really doesn't have much to do with it. The female takes care of the whole situation generally. Nature
Masters
taking its
and
course.
Johnson, they began in a clinic for infertility, and one of the ways they discussed that they got into the sexual response textbook, you might say. They had a couple who came and were unable to conceive for several years. Anyway, met their criteria for an infertile couple. They checked his sperm count after asking the wife how often they had sex. Well, the wife responded by saying, "Do you mean sleep together?" To which she responded, "Every night." Well, their initial thought was that he was probably a very low sperm count. And when they checked it, he was at the higher level of a sperm count.
So, Buford, is this story going to where they didn't understand intercourse?
I'm sorry?
Is that where this story is going? That they didn't understand intercourse?
Yes.
Okay. You could have said that a little more directly, please. So, that's not a problem, of whether they're gods or not. That's just a problem of poor education, don't you think?
Well, but who educated him?
Yeah, so...
And Masters and Johnson educated this couple, and they had no problems conceiving.
Yeah,
afterwards.
so Buford...
Who educated the initial couple?
Sure, but Buford, that's not an issue about how evolution occurs. That's simply a problem of a poorly educated society.
Right.
So, Buford, what we want to do is we want to move on because we are going to answer your question here with the next things. So, I guess what we'd like you to do is continue watching, turn the audio back up on your television, and we're going to go from single-cell creatures to multicellular creatures and explain how evolution does that, just as it did for us in the womb. Do you understand?
Well, I kind of understand, but I don't understand how the initial person, however he came,
And that's
understood.
because there was no initial person, and you haven't proven that. Buford, we're going to say thanks. We're going to move on, and thank you, Buford. So let's talk about it. That fertilized cell that became you began dividing. Now, if you're not twins or triplets, those cells stuck together. But if you are twins, they actually came apart, and then they divided and stuck together. And so that process of making twins is actually the same reproduction system that single-cell creatures have today. The one creature divides its two identical ones.
Like an amoeba or something.
So what this is a mechanism that shows how multiple creatures can develop. And humans have the ability to make identical creatures just like protozoans have. In a sense, we don't do it often, or so to speak, on purpose, but it can happen to this day. It is a throwback. All right, now once cells begin to divide, if they clump together, they begin to differentiate. They no longer are identical. And even some single-cell creatures like algae, if my memory serves me, when they grow in proximity to one another, they will secrete adhesive material so that they stay together. In a sense, they begin to cooperate, and they form a mound. If they grow in an area where there isn't predation on, they'll form a mound that represents amongst the oldest fossils known. They're called stromatolites. These are colonies of algae growing together, but they have a kind of characteristic shape. So that there's a kind of question: is that a body or not? Now, so if we go to the next step here, and we get the next slide here. Sam, if we can move to the next slide with the sponges. All right, so here's this. So do you want to grab the text, or do I keep reading?
Some types of life are slightly more organized with more distinctly differentiated cell types. Let's talk about sponges, or as the biologist calls them, porifera.
I think it's porifera, but I could be wrong as well.
The sponges.
Yeah. Well, sponges have a shape often like a sac, and they filter water through the walls of the sac. In this image, you can see about 5 distinct cell types, I guess, over my shoulder here. And there's the outside here, and the water goes through to the inside. Now, when I was in high school, I was told that you could tear up a living sponge, force the cells through a sieve, completely destroying the body, but the cells are still living, and they'll reassemble themselves into a new sac, or perhaps more than one. It is as if you were creating twins out of an adult. Now notice that with the evolutionary view of life, you find a blurring of what it is to even talk about what is an individual. It's not a black and white definition. What is an individual? All right.
No human adult could be passed through a sieve and reassembled into one or two humans. By comparison with the sponges, it would seem that naturally our cells have become too specialized to be torn from their neighbors in the same tissue or in other tissues, and to survive long enough to reassemble, even in the most favorable environmental imaginable.
Yeah. And of course, that's why, at least currently, we can't, humans don't clone readily. You can't just rip one cell out and say, we'll drop this into a womb and we'll get a whole adult. It doesn't work that way naturally. We're actually building technologies that may be able to do that soon. But it is, it's an interesting kind of question. It raises the question, what's an individual? Let's grab this call.
One image that I'd like to pass on to our viewers is I saw an underwater video one time where a diver took some ink and just squirted it next to a sponge, and the next thing you know, the ink was coming out of the top of the sponge. So that kind of illustrates how it feeds. It just sifts particles,
filters
food from the water. And welcome to Freethought Forum. You're on the air. May we have a name or a nickname? Hello, you're on the air.
Caller,
Hello.
speak up.
Hello.
Hello.
Great.
Name or nickname, please?
Hello. Yes, my name is Coco.
Okay.
I didn't get it, but...
Coco.
Coco, thank you.
Coco.
Thank you for calling, Coco. Do you have a comment or a question for us, please?
Well, I don't know how intelligent you'll think it is, but, I am a Christian, so
Okay.
I just want you to know that I pray for you all more than probably anybody.
So, may we ask why? What do you think what is the reason you would do that?
And what are you hoping?
Well, I grew up in a church atmosphere, and did you not?
I did.
I did not. So
Really?
I've never been a believer. Larry has been.
Really? I don't know. It just bothers me.
But why would you pray for Larry or me or both of us, Coco?
Because I care about people.
We do too. That's why we have this show here today.
Well, there's two options to a prayer that I like to talk about. One, either what you're praying for is in God's plan and it's redundant because it's already in His plan, or it's not in His plan, so it's useless. If we're not meant to be believers and it's in God's plan that way, then prayer is useless. As a matter of fact, praying for anything is useless if you think of it that way.
Do you understand
Well, you
Larry's?
never know. You could have a turnaround, maybe,
Well, maybe it's
in a year or two.
if that's the case, then it's already in God's plan, and prayer is
Right.
useless.
That's right. But I still...
Well, we appreciate your good vibes that you're sending to us.
Well, you're very thoughtful to worry about us.
Well, I do. I love all people.
All right.
Great. And did you have any other comment or question?
No, that was it.
And may I ask, have you ever watched our show before?
Yes, I have.
All right. Well, thank you for calling, and we're going to go try and finish up some evolution here. Coco, have a
Okay.
good day.
Thank you.
Okay, you too.
Bye-bye.
All right. So, currently no human could ever be passed through a sieve and be reassembled. However, I must point out, if the Bible be true, Jehovah tried an experiment like that. He chose for his experiment some children who had called his prophet Elisha, I guess, a baldy.
Yeah.
And if we believe the King James Version, he turned his back and looked on them and cursed them in the name of the Lord. And there came forth 2 she-bears from the woods and tare 42 children of them. No word is ever given on their recovery.
They didn't recombine.
Apparently not. Sponges are better at that than humans.
When cells form tissue types, we now have creatures called metazoans. The dictionary definition of this is multicellular animals having cells differentiated into tissues and organs and usually a digestive cavity and nervous system. That would be us.
Yes. With more specialized cells than a sponge, but a similar shape, an animal group called Cnidaria, I'm not sure, but what used to be called Coelenterata when I was about 30 years younger, we have something called a hydra, or the jellyfish. It has a shape similar to a sponge. I guess it's covered by my head. It's got kind of like an outside and the inside is hollow, but rather than feeding through the body, it actually goes in through a mouth.
And evolutionarily speaking, that was one of the first free-moving multicellular animals in the history of evolution. We now notice a curious, marvelous parallelism. In this group, the sac-like body plan is also like the blastosphere stage of a vertebrate, and therefore human gestation.
All right.
When the gut completely goes through the organism, we get a tubular body plan. When tissues around the gut can form other organs, including more tubes to allow fluids with nutrients and dissolved oxygen and CO2 to circulate. Muscular contractions move the fluids with valves, and valves become pumps.
Yeah, so what we see here is that this body plan already has something like a mouth, and if we move to the next slide, we see, and this,
Starting at the upper left. Upper left.
Way up here, this is the body plan that is something like the hydra. It's basically got just an opening, but if you complete it all the way through, you get a complete digestive tract. So that is a body that is a tube, and that is the body plan that you and I have, and so do all of our viewers. I don't think there are many protozoans who are watching us.
It's a complicated tube, but it's a tube.
All right, so, so the body plan of this tube, we tend to think of it as a very worm-like, and in fact, floating over Larry's head, we have what would be called an earthworm, and it has this body plan. It's a tube, kind of within a tube, but then what is developed are other parallel tubes, some of which have muscles, and when those muscles contract, they force fluid to flow. Now, worms like that have a repeated body plan or segmented body plan, and if we look way in the corner there in the screen, we're actually seeing that they have multiple hearts in parallel. Now, you and I have a segmented body plan as well. Can you think of what some of those segments are?
The head, the thorax.
Well, those are actually chunks of it, but there's something where the segmentation is far more obvious.
The spinal column.
The spine and our ribs. So we are like that as well. And that's where a portion of the body is simply just copied and repeated. And when you copy and repeat it and then can make changes to some of those copies, it gives you the opportunity to make quite interesting innovations. So if we move to the next slide about the circulatory system, I think there's one slide in between that shows the 3 different circulation plans. There we go. And of course, I'm covering up most of one. Well, this circulatory plan off my shoulder is a bit like the earthworms, and it's also like fish, where you've got a heart that pumps blood through a portion of the circulatory system where it can pick up air, which is on a worm, it's up by the surface of its skin, or in a fish, it's through the gills, and then down through the body, coming across my neck, apparently. Now, that scheme is improved upon in the amphibians, where you now have 2 pumps side by side. Now remember, in the earthworm we had multiple pumps. So this is actually kind of like the earthworm system, where you got two pumps, but you've connected them together on the far ends where all the little capillary action is. And in the amphibian, the circulation between the lungs and the body is not completely separated. The heart shares one common central feature. The central portion of the heart is called the ventricle. Now let's move to the one next slide. In the human heart, or the mammalian heart, it's completely separated into 4 chambers. But it's not always that way. When we are in the womb, our heart actually has a hole through the center. I guess it's right near Larry's head. And the left and the right ventricle have blood flow between them, and that's because it's not necessarily, well, it's not important for the blood to be forced through the lungs so vigorously when you're in the uterus, because there's no air to breathe. Right. And naturally, when we are born, that hole contracts down and then muscle grows over it, usually. But how many viewers have heard of a baby being born with, quote, a hole in the heart? Well, what that is it's leftover of this process where in development, we go through that same stage of having the 3-chamber heart that our ancestors had. So there's a kind of a thing that happens through our whole body development where we go through stages that are similar to our ancestors. In the 1800s, there were theories that were proposed that said kind of rigorously that we had to go through all those stages, and that's not correct. That's overstating the case.
We now know more about it.
But it is the case that we have echoes of the past all over our bodies. People talk about the appendix as something left over. Well, this hole in our heart is something that's left over as well. And so, in a way, I've tried to answer JT's question here. What did we do while we were waiting around for a heart to develop? And the answer is, we were creatures that didn't need a heart quite the same as the one we have now, and we got a heart piece by piece by adapting small changes. We're time to close up.
That's right.
I guess if you're waiting on me, you better just launch in. I'm falling behind.
Pen and paper. This is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Larry Rhodes.
And I'm Faithless Forrest. Please send us feedback. Leave voicemail at 865-272-9600 or email us at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com.
We're on every Tuesday from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern Time. We're streaming online at ctvknox.org.
We want to thank our viewers and our callers, and Sam and Jonas for their technical support, and the staff at CTV Knox.
Nuns are the fastest growing religious group in America, right here in East Tennessee. The Ask and RET groups are places where you can find fellowship and fun.
You're not alone.